As you know, we just completed our winter map testing, and I've been asked by our principal group to explain one of the reports that we'll be looking at in some of our PLC groups coming up next week, and that's the Student Growth Summary Report. Okay, so this report contains several pieces of information, but the most important thing to remember when you're looking at a growth report with MAP is this is all about growth. MAP provides two kinds of information. It provides both the growth information for individual and groups of students, and then it also provides normative information, which is things like percentile ranks, or if you're comparing a RIT score to what's typical for that grade level in that time of year. So this report is the Student Growth Summary, meaning we've grouped together groups of students and we're looking at how that looks for us as a district. This report is also available by building, and all of the administrators were provided this report just a few days ago, so they can share that with their staff whenever they're ready to do so. But as a school improvement team at the district level yesterday, we took a look at this as a group as well. So this is aggregated by district. So this is showing across the district our whole cohort groups of kids by grade level for winter of 2015. This particular report we're looking at is the reading report. Principals also have this report by district and by building for math and language usage. So I'm just going to walk through this report column by column and explain what we're looking at. First column is pretty self-explanatory. These are the grade levels. The only thing to remember here is that in 11th and 12th grade, we really don't test very many students. We test only special populations. So I typically advise folks to kind of disregard those two grade levels in terms of this report because we just don't have very many kids taking the test. As you can see, we had 30 11th graders and 62 12th graders for our winter testing this year. So those populations on reports like this are fairly unstable. So you need to be really cautious about what kind of conclusions you draw from that. The next column is the count of students. Because it's a growth report, the count will only include the numbers of students who took the test in both fall and winter. You can't look at growth without a pre-test and post-test kind of situation. So that population number there may not match precisely with the numbers of students that we have enrolled in kindergarten, for example. The next column shows fall 2014 performance for each of those cohort groups. The mean RIT is what that group of kindergartners' average score was. So this is just the numeric mean. Group them all together, divide by the number of students, and that's the mean score. The standard deviation is kind of an important piece of information. The standard deviation is just an index of variability within the group. So how much variation was there in the performance of our kindergartners? If it's 9.7, that's a whole lot more consistent in terms of their reading performance than if you look down here at 10th grade, we had 17.3 for our standard deviation. That shows that there's lots and lots of variability within that group, and what that means in a practical sense is we probably need to look at a lot more differentiation when we have a 17.3 standard deviation than we do a 9.7. If you looked at this on some of our other reports with MAP and you looked at RIT bands, for example, if you have a 9.7 standard deviation, your students might be grouped only across 2 RIT bands or maybe a total span of 20 RIT points. Whereas if you get down into 17 and 18 points, you're looking at widely distributed kids, and you probably need to look at differentiating for what they need. So that explains that. Next, you have winter of 2015 performance. So this is our most recent testing. We did this in December. And again, we have the mean RIT and the standard deviation. What is important to note here is if you have a 149.9, that's fine, but what you won't see on this report is how does that compare to a national average or a norm score. So what I typically do is I'll just take my pencil and go to my norm reference chart, and we can show you a shot of one of those as well. Most of us are fairly familiar with that. It's a reference document provided by NWEA that shows what's the typical score for fall, winter, and spring by grade level. So, for example, I might look at 149.9, and that's great, but I don't really know how that compares to a national average. So I would look at my norm chart, and I might just pencil in 149.9 is our performance, but I might pencil in maybe 151.2 was the national average. I'm making that number up. I don't know what it is right off the top of my head. But what I usually do when I'm looking at these is I'll just pencil in those averages, the mean, national mean, in the middle here somewhere, just to give me that context for the report. Then we have growth, and this is just looking at, okay, this is how we did in winter, 149.9, you subtract the fall, 139.3, and then you get the growth. 10.6 RIT points is what this means. It'll also report the sampling error, because anytime you have testing events, you have error involved in that. You have students who maybe didn't try, you have various kinds of things going on. There are various sources of error. But the main thing in this overall column is the average growth. That's what we're looking at. So again, now moving over to the count with projection, 282 students, mean projection. So of those 282 students, each one of them got a growth projection. We figure out what that average is of the growth projections. One student was projected to grow 8 points, another 12 points, another 7 points, and so forth, and comes out to 8.6 is the average growth projection for each of these 282 students. However, here's our mean projection, 8.6, but over here we saw our actual growth was 10.6. What that means is our growth index was 2.0. We exceeded the expected growth on average 2 points. That's great. That's where, if you look down here at this column, kindergarten, you can see their actual growth in the blue box exceeded the projection represented by the yellow diamond. If you're looking at these in black and white, you can still tell the difference between those and see that kindergarten exceeded their growth projection. So that's great as a group. So again, this index, this is going to tell you how much did our actual performance vary from what was projected. So you can see sometimes that's a positive number, sometimes that's a negative number. As in the case of first grade, growth projection was 10 points. We did grow, so we need to remember that. The actual growth, 7.5. So we get this. So the growth index, again, just represents how much did it vary from what was projected. Percent of projection, these two columns, by the way, here, the growth index and percent of projection refer to the points. Add up all the points that a student population was expected to grow at a grade level, and then we get a percent of projection. So if the growth index is positive, on the positive side, then the percent of projection will be above 100%, as it is here. If the actual growth was below the projection, as it was for first grade, then we see a number that's below 100%. But again, we have to remember this doesn't mean that the group didn't grow. In fact, they did. They just didn't meet that projection. Now we look at these last two columns, and these two refer to actual students. This is about kids. So the count who met their projection was 197 students for kindergarten out of the 282 students who had a projection. So the percentage of students meeting, 69.9% of students met their growth projection, and that's great. That pretty much covers it for what these columns indicate. The only thing I want to add about the chart below, fairly self-explanatory, but as with any chart you ever look at, you want to take note of the scale. Sometimes it looks like, wow, we really didn't meet that projection. You need to remember what the scale is here. And this difference between where the actual growth was and where the projection was, goes back up to this growth index column. This is 2.6 RIT points. That's the difference here. It is not a huge span, particularly at first grade, when we know that typical growth is somewhere around 18 points for reading over the course of a year. The other thing we need to remember about our actual testing situation here is there are fewer instructional weeks and instructional days between our fall map window and winter map window than there are between our winter map window and our spring map window. We have more instructional weeks in our spring semester between map windows. So this happens occasionally for us, depending on how we schedule our map windows. So lots of celebrations here, many grade levels, the majority of them met or exceeded their growth expectation. Some did not. We need to look further into that. This is just one piece of information.